Hey y'all, welcome back to another MoC boss guide, this time featuring our first Starward rotation with two familiar faces and an all-new boss in Graphia. As always, feel free to skip to whatever timestamps you need using the description below. Without further ado, let's jump right into things. Starting with the MoC buffs, we have an unconditional 50% damage boost to ults and follow-ups, which is pretty nice. Obviously, it's primarily there for the Ashblade core, as well as units that work well with them, like Akron and Fei Xiao. But pretty much every crit DPS under the sun that isn't Elation appreciates the no strings attached power-up. Following from that, the usual memory turbulence bounce hits scale off of ults and follow-ups, up to 15 a cycle. It's not too difficult to fill this up a decent amount, or even overcap it in the 0 cycle, and the bonus bounce damage it offers versus bosses and elites, while nowhere near the absurd auto-win AoE damage numbers versus Sneakador 2 MoC rotations ago, sure is nice. Now, moving on to the big bad bosses. Since Reaver keeps reincarnating each new rotation cycle, and SparxiCon keeps popping up like a virus in endgame, I'll be taking a different approach with them, and instead, examine how they've changed since their last appearances in both Memory of Chaos and Anomaly Arbitration. Starting with Reaver, it's been 6 patches since his last debut in MoC, and with that, a 60% increase in HP as well. Additionally, we've upgraded from easier elites like the Fury Praetor to more harder hitting, corrosion heavy, Black Tide elites in the Dark Sun Griffin and the Corroded Daemon. The change from boosting summons to boosting ultimates and follow-ups is overall a buff for the entire roster, but it's obviously nowhere near enough to offset a whopping 1.6 times HP multiplier. To combat the 300,000 HP increase in Reaver's vessels, among other things, we've gotten roster upgrades and supports, such as Cyrene, who completes all the Chrysos heirs, the Dahlia, who makes Break actually playable versus this boss, and Nova Flared Sparkle, who provides a general power boost to crit DPS. And all of these upgrades were made available in 4.0, where essentially the buff version of this MoC rotation made its first debut. Not only were the HP values about 5% higher compared to the current Reaver lineup, but we also had crippling debuffs in Inversion and Depowered that slowed down many teams by A, usually forcing them to run a sustain, and B, erasing all of their starting energy. Between this Anomaly Arbitration appearance and the next one, we've received 2 Nova Flares in Seela and Welt, both of whom match up well versus this boss, and Ashvale, who, similar to Nova Seela, loves farming vessels to build up more attacks for himself. Of course though, we can't talk about AoE DPS capable of dealing condensed single target damage without mentioning Evanesia, who, besides a lack of physical weak on Reaver, is pretty much the perfect matchup versus him. Makes you wonder why Phynon isn't weak to his own element low-key. The addition of 2 single target DPS that matched well into Reaver, and 1 AoE, was much needed going into 4.2's buff rerun, with taunting rendering most AoE solutions a lot less useful thanks to stray Reaver hits now becoming a downside. And with the HP pools now being about 20% higher than what we're currently facing in MoC today, as well as the addition of the 80% fire and imaginary resistant elites, seeming for the sole purpose of saying screw you to any prospective Sparxi and Silverwolf runners, it's not hard to see why this MoC feels, and very much is, a lot easier by comparison. Especially since now, we have powerful new AoE fighter DPSs in Mortonak's Blade and Himiko Nova, who absolutely tear Reaver a new one, and the Fate DLCs who, if nothing else, are on element answers to Mr. Definitely from Britain here, is quite comparable to Reaver's difficulty in Anomaly Arbitration 3 patches ago, but without all the BS debuffs that made that stage so frustrating in the first place, and compared to its last rerun, it's a lot squishier too. Hardly surprising then that Reaver was voted the least difficult boss of the 3 by far. In contrast to Reaver though, SparxiCon's last appearance in MoC was just 3 short patches ago. The starting lineups also look a bit more similar, with the Rocking Rebel in both rotations and the previous Canvas Peacock and aggressive reading materials in Wave 1 being replaced by the 80% Quantum Res Elite, Anti-Archer and Caster's measures being deployed clearly. However, within that short period of time, SparxiCon and her goons have actually experienced more HP inflation than Reaver has, with special mention to the reading materials being over twice as tanky. Good on her for trying to raise players' literacy rates, I guess. This is somewhat made up for by the fact that Elation is a lot more complete with the addition of Evanesia and Superwolf, along with Elation MC as a secondary support. Oh, and Firefly post Nova Flare also makes quick work of a shared HP 3-target boss. Choir 2.0 anyone? In fact, from that very same patch, SparxiCon's HP is now rapidly approaching her King counterpart, only having about 6% less. While the King debuffs do still make it more punishing for a traditional crit, with the 20% final damage reduction at most, this debuff doesn't apply to Breaker Elation, with there even being a 30% final damage bonus to all non-crit damage, so DOT can join in on the fun too. And well, looking just one patch ago, we see the return of the 80% Quantum Res Gundam. Sorry, Rin. And thanks to his abilities' 10% damage reduction towards all types of damage, 4.2's Anomaly Arbitration actually ends up being slightly tankier than 4.0's King, and by extension, this current MoC. That being said, it's certainly no 20% increase from the last time we saw Reaver, not to mention SparxiCon's tankiness is only being removable with Elation Shield versus Reaver's not being archetype locked, making this MoC SparxiCon a bit less of a decrease in difficulty. Plus, Fire's shared HP is like Mortanax and Himiko Nova's calling card, and Gilgamesh with the destruction status could probably put on a good enough blast performance with the likes of Saber, so her best counters are a bit over the horizon right now. Overall, treat this fight like how you would 4.2's Anomaly Arbitration version of SparxiCon. Certainly no pushover anymore, but it still falls to the same counters, plus a few extra if you end up pulling them later. Though I guess the Rocking Rebel's return makes the upfront damage this time around absolutely brutal if you don't have a sustain, or if you just get unlucky with Wobo. With those two covered, let's get right into the paint with our newest boss, somehow not Himiko. First of all, this is probably our first boss in a while who is a pure, no-nonsense, single-target sponge. Even Mechapom had real incentive for killing its summons, whereas Graphia's clowns just kinda refund a skill point and deal like 60k HP to Graphia on death. They don't even hit particularly hard. Speaking of clowns though, the one on wave 1 can be abused to farm loss of healing from. And versus Graphia herself, you can use her CC to your advantage and try and gain some healing or damage reduction for it. Or if you're running mono Rem here instead of versus Reaver for some reason, hurting yourself in game is good. Note that if you do want to roll to get out of CC jail, you'll take on average 1.9 skill points to get out. So if you don't want to go through reset hell, manage your skill points accordingly. And finally, the sustain check past wave 1 is really not that hard, and honestly just disappears completely after killing the imaginary Res Gundam, letting you run more techie options for CC mitigation like Fu Xuan, Gallagher, and Aventurine, provided you can get over that hump. More on that later though. As for DPS rankings, well, this stage is kinda just made for the Ashblade core. Not only is Graphia herself a single target, fire and lightning weak enemy, but the Clown Elite on wave 1 is tailored to give both Ashvale attack buffs and blade healing at the same time. Of course, just about anyone can abuse this, but none to quite the same extent, especially factoring in Morty's 90% damage reduction and AoE taunt technique, letting him come out HP positive after the Daybreak mech goes in with her flywheel. And well, single target Quantum Weak with skill points needed to bypass CC mechanics? Would you look at that, it's Hoyo's favorite collab unit, Archer, back with another skill point regenerating DLC. Otherwise, pretty much anyone with good single target and element matching excels versus this fight, doing better depending on recency and investment level. It's also why Himiko Nova gets to wreck the stage as an erudition unit. I guess familial ties don't give you shield per se, but they do let you get the job done. In fact, if you can ignore the CC mechanics of this fight, Graphia is by far the weakest boss in terms of raw HP, having Reaver's exact same health without any of the damage reduction. Big if though, of course, as evidenced by nearly half of you claiming this was the biggest headache of the 3 bosses. Though some of it could be unfamiliarity with their mechanics too. Who knows? Here's the stat breakdown for Wave 1. With 2-3 million HP elites, this puts Graphia's Wave 1 squarely in the middle in terms of raw bulk, though the Clown, or God-Devouring Offspring as it's legally called, does make this stage a fair bit easier for any attack scalers and or sustainless teams. With both elites having attack spam checks, and the endgame buff favoring follow-ups, it's natural that they're advantaged here. And with the Dawnlance Elite having 80% imaginary res, Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that an imaginary DPS, like Superwolf for example, is welcome here in global passive only. If that wasn't enough to dissuade you though, Graphia herself has 40% res to all elements she isn't weak to, including physical, ice, wind, and of course imaginary, when normally the standard res is 20%. The God-Devouring Offspring she summons are noticeably weaker than the ones in Wave 1, and arguably dumber too, as all they can do is swing their hammers around. I'll explain her CC mechanic in more detail during her boss attack breakdown, but in short, you can either remove it by passing that ally's turn and gaining a temporary 70% damage for your troubles, or play Burning Shingsha Simulator and hope for the opposite of a hot streak. But turning to the Wave 1 elites, let's first clown on the God-Devourer Offspring's mechanics. Its turn 1 is a weak single target that can lower defense, which is then followed up by inflicting the Devour state on one ally. That ally has 50% of the restorable max HP and 1000 attacks stolen, which they can gain back 1/6 at a time from anyone hitting it. Upon hitting 6, a break, or a kill on the clown, he gives 500 attack for 3 turns to the ally who last hit it. Considering you can farm this buff on consecutive turns if you remove it fast enough, and that Robin's ult buff roughly translates to about 1000 attack on average, yeah, this really isn't a small boost. If Devour isn't removed by turn 2 though, then the Offspring will do the same single target hit, followed by an AoE that honestly looks scarier than it actually is. What is scarier though, is its partner Elite's damage output. Okay, look, yes, I did use the blue Azure Wings attack visuals for the yellow Dawnlance, but they're literally the same elite besides the element they super resist, so cut me some slack, okay? Anyways, rehashing what y'all probably know at this point, its turn 1 is a single target, followed by a blast that hits way too hard for how little energy it gives. Then, her turn 2 has her perform the same blast followed by entering the force field state. In this state, the elite is both CC immune and break immune, and hitting her with any imaginary attacks in this state will immediately advance her. Hit the elite 7 times and this state goes away, making her vulnerable and half as imaginary resistant for the next 3 turns. If it gets to attack while the force field is up, it will perform a massive single target burst on a random ally, which again really does feel like it should give more energy for how much damage it's doing, but maybe that's appropriate here for an attack that's essentially punishing you for either mismatching elements or playing too slow. Now, on to the founding artist herself. Turn 1 starts rather simply with a single target attack, followed by a stronger single target attack that inflicts her signature crowd control effect, Grudge Ablaze. Unlike Ill Wishes, this debuff at least doesn't ignore CC and effect res, but with a whopping 200% base chance, it might as well ignore any resistance numbers below 100%. For perspective, the next highest base chance enemies have until this point is 120, and that's already impressive enough on statuses like Scarasabaz's Entanglement and Kafka's Dominate. Luckily, Grudge only lasts for a turn. Graphia isn't a bitter soul at heart. At the start of the turn, it doesn't burn damage, then lets your character choose one of 2 options. Either pass a turn, gain 1 skill point, and accept 70% damage reduction for 1 turn in exchange, or spend 1 skill point to gamble for a 1 in 3 chance to regain your turn, losing 30% max HP, but boosting your success odds by another 1 in 3 chance per fail, and healing 30% max HP instead upon success. These options replace your DPS's basic and skill options, so Himiko Nova and her fellow Trailblazers can actually get around this by pressing assist skill and passing turn, funny enough. Turn 2 then has Graphia summon 2 much weaker clowns, advancing them by 100% and 50% respectively, and enhancing them with 1 stack of Beyond Human Realm. Each realm stack boosts their max HP by 5% and their damage dealt by 10%, which still doesn't usually translate into anything, though if they do accumulate at least 2 of these realm stacks, this attack will also immediately advance them. Note that these clowns will only use their single target hits, so no max HP and attack farming from these folks, sadly. This is then followed up by the same turn 1 Light Bach. Getting into the math of how the Grudge debuff works, which is going to be pretty important in a sec, it's unremovable first of all, meaning that any attempt to cleanse it has a 0% chance of working, with the sole exception of Mech Awolfi 999 of course. Keep in mind that its cleanse is one-time use only, and the CC immunity status afterwards only lasts for 1 turn per ally, meaning that it doesn't usually work against the second Grudge instance, or the third. Otherwise, with Graphia having a 200% base chance debuff and 36% effect hit rate, as is the standard for Memory of Chaos enemies, you need at least 64% effect res for even a chance to resist it, and a whopping 82% effect res to bring that chance up to a 50-50 coin flip, assuming no other sources of resistance. Besides the obvious picks with built-in CC immunity like Evernight, Finon, Maide, and Yun Li when she counters, Firefly actually comes in with an innate 50% F-res, meaning that paired with any F-res boosters like E1 Gallagher, she is actually able to innately resist this debuff a lot of the time. Besides F-res boosters like Gallagher and Aventurine though, both Quantum Sustains in Fushun and Lynx come with one-time guaranteed CC prevention, though in Lynx's case it's single target and also you have to use Lynx, which may not be the worst thing in the world actually, provided that you have the skill points to spare of course. Luocha and Huohuo are more selfish, only boosting their own CC resistance, but hey, it does mean that they can face tank a single target Grudge usually no problem, although of course Huohuo's cleanses don't work against unremovable debuffs. Hyacinth is also a selfish booster, but what makes her special compared to the likes of Luocha and Huohuo is that she has a funny interaction with this so-called debuff. Since every escape attempt counts as an ability being used by her, Ika gets to attack each time she presses either the defense or gamble button, letting her unicorn spin up to 5 times in a single quote-unquote unlucky turn. Monorem abusing HP loss debuffs though, what's new? And well, that situation isn't exactly hard to set up, considering that Murata opens her phase 2 with an immediate AoE that grudges 2 allies. Note that 2 allies will always be CC'd if possible. If Grudge fails to land on an ally for whatever reason, it will simply try reapplying to the next available ally, until either Grudge is attempted to land on every single ally, or 2 allies have been crowd controlled. This means that in a typical mono Rem team for example, if your Hyacinth has 100% F-res and your Evernight is CC immune, then the debuffs are guaranteed to land on casters and Cyrene. If that doesn't sound ideal, you might want to look into lowering your Hyacinth's F-res so she can farm the heals for herself as mentioned before. Turns 2 and 3 here are the same as turn 2 in phase 1, followed by a repeat of the big train attack on turn 4, and again every 3 turns after that. And yeah, that's Graphia. So what do I think about this rotation overall? Well, for one, I think it's neat how we have a single target, blast, and AoE check boss mixed in together this time around. Makes the burden of having to spread out resources between 3 different teams a little less weighty, as there's naturally less archetype overlap through each of the bosses, demanding different checks. Heck, even though all 3 bosses are quantum weak, wouldn't you know it, this is the one rotation where Mr. 80% Quantum Res Daybreak Azure Wing makes his return. Additionally, I'm sure it's no coincidence that this MoC rotation features essentially nerfed reruns of previous Anomaly Arbitration menaces. Enough of a calm before the storm, to where about a quarter of you found this rotation to be pretty easy breezy overall. Assuming y'all are being truthful, of course. That being said, I do want to talk about the types of teams that seem to be rising in the meta as of recently. There seems to be the sentiment that version 3's AoE meta is being slowly phased out for version 4's single target 1, but I don't think that's quite the whole picture. Rather, it feels like version 4 is shifting more towards genuine multi-DPS comps, where you're usually stuck between either the bundled comps of Remembrance, Revamped Break, or Elation, hopping onto the Mortanax Blade bandwagon, or tapping into the Fate team's joint attacks. If anything, Mortanax Blade universality, along with 2 eruditions dropping this upcoming week, indicates that AoE content is on the rise if anything. It's just that single target content isn't slowing down anytime soon either, and erudition is being remodeled to not be target dependent like it used to be, hence the Ashblade duo being as dominant as it is. But regardless of whatever meta team you choose, there is one constant that remains: the Trailblazer. with the sole exception of Archer, who now has both Rin and Sparkle, and thus can comfortably kick out MC from the team. All the meta teams mentioned above have a slot open for the one eternally free 5-star character on everybody's account. Mono Remembrance can slot in Remembrance MC, as the name suggests, though they are easily replaced if you have the full Exodia lineup of Casperus, Hyacinth, Evernine, and Cyrene. However, in Himiko Nova's team, where their unique Astral Express status is unmatched, and in Saber and Gil's team, where their unique energy-based action advance is also irreplaceable, it's not hard to find scenarios where you'd want 3 clones of the Trailblazer for 3 different teams at once. And if not tapping into the Remembrance path, well, Elation MC is perfectly serviceable within the Elation Extravaganza, and Harmony MC still beats Ron May and Psygrade's Fugit E0 in the Break bundle too. It's one thing to try and make 3 strong endgame teams with 12 unique characters, it's a whole nother challenge altogether when those 3 teams are all vying for the same exact member, and you have to choose, even if that member so happens to be free. With that said, what do you think? Has building 3 different teams been your biggest challenge with Starward so far? How hard has Starward been for you? And are any of you in the waiting room for Himiko Nova and Fate, or are we hoping and praying for the Penacony SPs? No matter what your heart desires, feel free to drop it in the comments. And of course, thanks for watching.